Bruchim Habayim, welcome to the Alpine Synagogue. I want to thank everyone for coming to this special event. I want to thank, first of all, the host committee for arranging it. I want to thank Akiva Garner for putting a lot of work into making this happen. Give him a big round of applause. Yeah. When I announced this event in Shul 2 weeks ago, I said, every Ashkenazi Jew suffers either from depression or anxiety or both. So you all should come. That was my pitch. But the truth is, this is an extremely important subject. Just this week's Parsha, actually the very beginning, Hashem commands Moshe to go reassure the Jewish people. V'hotzeti v'yitzalti v'ga'alti v'lakachti. I will take you out, I will save you, I will redeem you, I will make you my nation. And it says that the Jewish people did not listen to Moses. Why? V'lo shamu el Moshe. They did not listen to Moshe. Mikotze ruach u'me'avoda kasha. The simple translation is, Mikotze ruach means what? Shortness of breath, u'me'avoda kasha. And from hard work. The simplistic pshat, the Rashbam actually explains the reason why didn't they believe Moshe. Actually, at the end of last week's parsha, it says that they believed him. So why did they change their mind? The reason is for it because it got worse. Things didn't get better. Since Moshe came to Pharaoh, actually, their load has heightened. Their anguish became even greater. So that's why they're not listening. They're rejecting Moshe. But most of the Mefarshim actually speak about why they did not listen on the pshat of the words. Rashi says, Mikotze ruach, kol mishu metzer, rucho nshimato ktsara, ve'no yachol la'arich b'nshimato. Karov לעניין זה שמעתי בפרשה זו מרבי ברוך ורבי Eliezer. He says, stressed out people do not breathe properly. My grandmother, whenever I get stressed, would always fight his children. Take 3 deep breaths. Pick up your hands, pull them down. It will stress me out even more trying to do that. You look at the words of Rabbeinu Bachye, he says, Mikotze ruach, what is the shortness of breath? Ki adam hamishtokek shiamut. A person who wants to die. What do we call that today in English? Suicidal. Bitzar asher rubo, v'hu mo'es b'chayav. Someone who's in pain and actually does not want to live anymore. Nachmanides writes, he says, בעבור שלא יאמינו בזה ובנביאו, לא בעבור שלא יאמינו בזה ובנביאו. They would believe Moshe. רק שלא ייתו אוזן לדבריו, מקוצר רוח. They didn't pay attention to what he was saying. He had this amazing speech. They weren't even paying attention. כאדם שתקצר נפשו בעמלו. People were so stressed out in their work. ולא ירצה לחיות רגע בצערו. And they don't want to even continue one more moment in their suffering and their pain. מדעתו שירווח לו אחרי כן. They're not willing, that's what we call today delayed gratification. They just focus on the now, they're not able to see forward. וקוצר הרוח ופחדם שלא ירגם פרעה בחרב כאשר אמרו שוטריהם אל משה. And they have anxiety, they have fear. And when people have fear, they're not able to see. They could have literally Moses speaking in the name of God, telling them about redemption, and they're not going to see it, they're not going to hear it, they're not going to pay attention to it. So we have stress, we have anxiety, we have depression, and we have fear, all coming together, kind of why we weren't even able to pay attention to redemption. I think it's fair to say we all have our personal mental health struggles that we go through, which are extremely important. And we, as a community, I think we're going through a lot of PTSD and mental health struggles after October 7th. We're struggling with fear, with anxiety, with depression, sometimes multiple of these feelings, sometimes one of them, and they affect the way we behave, the way and I'm speaking personally about myself. I actually, whenever I go to Israel, my favorite thing to do is going to a bookstore called Pomerantz Bookstores in Jerusalem. And I spend way too much money there. I sit down, they give me a chair, I sit in a corner, and I kind of give each book I have 10 minutes to make the case. And these Israeli books, and the shekel is, and the dollar is weak, it's expensive. And I saw Nafshi BiShe'elati. It's a beautiful, outstanding work that really is a tremendous resource. Rabbi Rosenzweig, together with Dr. Harris, really went toe-to-toe with all the Talmudic discussions and references to anything that we know, whether shoteh or any other aspects of mental health, and bringing in today's day and age is extremely important. It's interesting, when it comes to mental health, halacha evolves not very quickly. That's a reality. There's a lot of debate in the field. I'm not a mental health professional. A lot of you are. But it's not a simple thing. So the clarity with which Rabbi Rosenzweig has brought this very important subject that relates not just to rabbis, but to any individual who wants to make Torah a Torah of life, a Torah Chaim, it's an extremely valuable resource. So I bought it in Hebrew, but now it already exists in English. Nafshi BiShe'elati, paraphrasing Esther, who also was suffering with anxiety and stress when she had to go in front of Achashverosh, putting her life in danger. I'll just give one example of how understanding of mental health has changed halacha. One example. Centuries ago, if someone would commit suicide, they would not be buried in a Jewish cemetery. The families would have not sit shiva, because it's considered the greatest sin is to take your own life. It's a murder. Today, within the most religious communities, the ultra Orthodox, in cases of suicide, they bury them in a Jewish cemetery, they sit shiva, they mourn the passing. And that's an evolution. That's just one example of an evolution in understanding of mental health. It's a small example, but it's an important example, and something that I got to see as a rabbi in my day-to-day. So actually, for me, this is, I'm starstruck. It's the first time I actually meet Rabbi Rosenzweig in person, and I'm extremely grateful, and I want to salute you for incredible work. Please give a warm welcome to Rabbi Yoni Rosensweig.
Rabbi's word is said, I hope. Yeah, we're good? Okay. Thank you very much for that introduction. If you guys know Pomerantz, you know that it's impossible to walk into that store and not pay too much money. It's just how it is. So, doesn't matter how many books he bought there, it's too much money. That's just how it is. I really, first of all, want to say thanks again to the rabbi, to the Rebbetzin, to Akiva, to anyone who was involved in organizing this. Really appreciate it. I understand this goes on once a month, or right, on average or something, right? Something like every what? Every week. Oh, great. Okay. Baruch Hashem. Okay. So I think it's really wonderful. And it's also, I'll be very honest, I'm almost never given the amount of time that I'm given here. In other words, it's really nice that this goes for so long. Usually I give 35 minutes talk and then another 10, 15 minutes of questions, and that's where it ends. But, here, Baruch Hashem, person's given ample time to discuss an issue at length. And I think that's really wonderful, and wonderful that you have the patience for that. But I promise I won't take advantage of you. And we're gonna get to the point. We're gonna make it interesting. And But anyway, thank you so much. Here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna plan it out for you. Okay. What we're gonna do is I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how I got into mental health and halacha. We're just gonna give a baseline so everyone knows how we got into that. I'm gonna explain what mental health and halacha is and what that looks like. I'm going to give some examples. I'm going to talk also about the significance of that for the community and why it's so important to discuss this issue. And then also I will discuss some practical cases with you just to show you how, what kind of things come my way and how I deal with those things, and then we'll open up for questions at the end. Okay, that's the plan for tonight. But let's start at the beginning. So people always ask me how I got into this and what led me to this, and the answer is not that interesting, okay? It's not because of some story or something that happened to me. It completely has to do with the fact that I'm a community rabbi in Beit Shemesh, and people ask me questions, okay? And from those questions, I went and I looked into the issue and realized that almost nothing was written on this topic, right? And the rabbi already mentioned that with mental health, things are slow in terms of development. I look around this room, I see so many wonderful Sfarim, so many wonderful books here. But as you know, there are libraries that are 10, 20, 100, 1,000 times more than this. And yet, within those libraries, you will find very little work on mental health and halacha, okay? And the great poskim, who we all breathe their names with awe, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rav Ovadia Yosef, the Tzitz Eliezer, Rav Shevet Halevi, Rav Wosner, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, et cetera, et cetera. All these individuals whose rulings are quoted right and left wrote almost nothing on the issue of mental health and halacha. And that's not to say, and I'm not claiming, that they never paskined on these issues. I know for a fact that they paskined on these issues. I remember once I spoke to a social worker from Tveria, and he said to me, of course, Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's son, who lived in Tveria, Reb Avram Dov Auerbach, had a forum with social workers. They would raise their questions, and he would answer. So I said to him, that's great news. Did you guys write anything down? He said, nope, wrote nothing down. I said, okay, well, do you remember anything that was said? He says, I have no memory and no recollection of anything that was said. I said, okay, that's really great story. You should tell it more at parties. It's really great. The problem is not that people didn't paskin on mental health and halacha, it's that they wrote nothing down. And even when they did write some things down, they were usually short, and they did not explain how they got to the conclusion, right? So Rav Moshe Feinstein has a line here and a line there, right? He does discuss, for example, postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis. These are things that are discussed in a line, right? In two lines, here and there. Rav Waldenberg, the Tzitz Eliezer, who was the Rav of Sharei Tzedek, and I can only assume was asked questions about mental health and halacha, has one tshuva that I'm aware of that is dedicated to this issue. It's whether you say hagomel on a mental health condition that you are now better from, right? That's the tshuva that he wrote. Beyond that, I don't know anything really that he wrote on the subject. One time someone wrote me an email. He said, send me everything you have from Rav Ovadia Yosef on the issue of mental health. That was not so hard. I don't have anything from Rav Ovadia Yosef, so I sent a blank email back. And there was nothing to send. As far as I know, in all of his tshuvas, that's his books, famous books are Yechavedat and Yabia Omer and Chazon Ovadia, and even the tshuvas that his Mishamish or Naki put together, Mayan Omer. I scoured the books. As far as I know, there's nothing written. Once again, not claiming he never paskin on it, no one ever dealt with it. Of course they did. But written down, almost nothing. Therefore, what we are left with, right, and when I came to the topic, once again, what I realized was that we kind of have to start over. Of course there are some things, of course there are some issues that have been discussed, of course there are some rulings, there's an article here and an article there, but, few and far between. Chazal have a saying. They say, Hakol talui b'mazal, afilu sefer Torah shebayechal. Right? What does the line mean? Everything depends on luck, even a Sefer Torah. A Sefer Torah is pretty much the holiest thing, holiest object that we have today. Right? Sefer Torah is the thing. And yet, I don't know how many Sefer Torah you have in this shul, but usually what you have is 2 or tops 3 Sefer Torah that kind of like are taken in and out, and the other ones gather dust. Even a Sefer Torah, which is important, some of them just gather dust. And no one ever uses them, no one ever opens them up, no one ever looks at them. Even something important is sometimes neglected. Mental health is important. It's nevertheless neglected a lot of times. And even within mental health, hakol talui b'mazal. Even there, it depends on luck. Right? If I asked you to name fields or areas where there is a conflict between halacha and mental health, I think a lot of you would gravitate towards OCD. I think OCD is relatively lucky in that sense, meaning people are kind of familiar, with OCD, kind of familiar with what could be a halakhic issue or something, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, But what if I said eating disorders? You'd be like, oh, I know about fasting and eating disorders. Yeah, okay. There's a lot of other stuff, by the way. Yeah, even with OCD, there's other stuff. And if I said depression, and if I said borderline personality disorder, and if I said PTSD, and if I said ADHD, and if I said dementia, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of these things, right, we know the condition more or less. Do we and are we aware of the halakhic issues, the religious challenges that come with these things? I'm not as sure that we are familiar with that, sorry. But we definitely need to be familiar and we'll see also why. Anyway, all that is to say that coming to this topic, I really had to try and create something a little bit out of nothing, and couldn't do it on my own because I am not a mental health professional. And this is a good time to kind of like air that out. Because sometimes people say to me, so where did you get all your, I came into this knowing pretty much nothing, okay? I think I have a good sense for psychology and psychiatry, but, beyond, having a good sense for it, I don't have any formal training, okay? I'm not a social worker, I'm not a psychologist, certainly not a psychiatrist, et cetera. I have no formal training. And therefore, I did need, of course, assistance. I went to my friend Dr. Shmuel Harris, perhaps some of you know him. He's a psychiatrist in Israel, originally from Melbourne. I did shlichut in Melbourne for 3 years, so that's where I met him. And we sat together for 4 years and we wrote this book. First 2 years were just me kind of like immersing myself in that world, trying to figure out, what's what, who's who, both from a halakhic and from a mental health perspective. And the next 2 years were devoted both to writing the book and to taking it to different mental health professionals and to different poskim to get them to sign off, okay, on the book. And that last part was really, really important, okay, about taking it to other rabbis and getting them to give their opinions, okay? Why was that important? There are 2 reasons why that's important. First of all, because I respect the wisdom of Rabbanim who are older than me and more knowledgeable than me, and I wanted to get their take, for the book. So obviously for purely content reasons, it was very, very important for me to make the rounds and try to get, as wide a knowledge base as I could. But there was another reason why that was important. We're all Jews here, right? So, it's there's always a rabbi you love and there's a rabbi you hate. You know what I'm trying to say? So I always know that, if there's whenever, it doesn't matter who I went to. If I would say to people, I went to this and this rabbi, there was always going to be someone who's going to say, that guy, that's the one you went to? He doesn't know anything about mental health, or he's too stringent, he's too lenient, he's too liberal, he's too whatever. Okay, fine. I honestly don't care much for the rabbinic politics, and I did not want it to get in the way of the book. The goal at the end of the day was that the book should help people and not be a hindrance. The only way to help people is to make sure that when they open the book, they find a rabbi that they trust. Inevitably, they'll find a rabbi they also don't trust, but that's okay. Yeah, I'm okay with that. Like if you open the book and you find somebody like, that guy, I would never follow that person, et cetera. Okay, great, But I'm sure you'll find other names that you're happy with. And therefore, I really tried to take also rabbis who are relatively, let's call them liberal, and rabbis who are relatively stringent, Haredi in their ashkafa, et cetera, et cetera. And the goal was to be as sweeping as possible in terms of the spectrum. All right, so some of the rabbanim, just for the fun of it, to name drop, here from America, I went to Rav Willig and Rav Schechter, but besides them, I went to Rav Asher Weiss, I went to Rav Yitzhak Zilberstein, who's a very big Haredi posek, son-in-law of Rav Elyashiv, if you remember that name, Rav Elyashiv. So he related to him. Rav Eliyahu Barjil is a Haredi Sephardi posek. Within the religious Zionist world, I went to my Rebbe before he passed away, Rav Rabinovich, that's all from Ala Adumim, Rav Baruch Gigi from Har Etzion, Rav Re'em from Otniel, Rav Melamed, Prinei Halacha, I'm sure you know the book, Rav Henkin, Zatzal, before he passed away. I spoke to him about some of the issues. Rav Sherlo, perhaps you know that name, more from the liberal side, et cetera, et cetera. I could continue on with a few names, but you get the gist of it, right? Rav Yaakov Ariel, Rav Dov Lior, these are also significant poskim in the religious Zionist world. Once again, the goal was to bring under one roof enough names that anybody who opens the book can be somech on what's in there. My name doesn't carry weight, but their names definitely do, so the book is helpful. And so the book is indeed helpful to a person who opens it, so they can rely on what's in there. And that was hard to do. I just want to say that was hard to do. It was hard to most of these rabbis don't have WhatsApp. I don't know if you picked up on that, But luckily, what I found is that even great rabbanim need to daven with a minyan, so you can always catch them somewhere. So if you know where they're davening, you can ambush them outside a mincha or a shachris, and then you can catch them. Then they can't escape. Anyway, so that's but that took some doing, but that's okay. We did that. We got it done, and I think that's part of the success of the book. Part of the success of the book was indeed bringing all those names under one roof and getting the askamas, getting the psakim. Anyway, all that was, as I said, 4 years. That became an idea to create an organization. Today I run a nonprofit called Maglei Nefesh. Maglei Nefesh basically does three things. We answer shailas in halacha and mental health. We train rabbis in this field, meaning whatever I went through, I'm trying to give that over, expand the amount of people that are out there giving those responses, and raising awareness, kind of like what I'm doing here. Okay, raising awareness, speaking in different places. I travel quite a bit. Those are the basic things that we do today in Maglei Nefesh, and if there are questions about that at the end, I'm happy to answer them, but that's the gist of it. Okay, so that was the brief history part. All right, moving on. What is halacha and mental health? Meaning, what kind of questions do I get? So some of them, like I said, some of them I'm sure you can anticipate, and some of them I'm sure you won't be able to anticipate at all. I don't have to say the word beauty, but the interesting thing about mental health and halacha is that you can honestly never expect where the next shaila is going to come. All right, so it's a mixed bag. All right, the classic things, right, that you probably are familiar with, are probably like OCD and halacha, right? Okay, fine. If I repeat a word or a sentence a million times, in davening because of the OCD, right? What do I do with that, right? I had a kid out of Maladumim, who was it a frat? I think it was a Maladumim. Anyway, who contacted me. He just couldn't get to class on time, meaning all his friends would daven within 20, 25 minutes, and he would take an hour, and his parents were frustrated, his teachers were frustrated, etc. It's all because of the OCD, and he wasn't getting things done. We needed to shorten the time that he was davening, but that was basically because he thought that he needed to have kavanah, to have good intent throughout the whole thing, and if he didn't have the exact kavanah, etc., he had to repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat, right? So that was the OCD, okay? So that's more of a classic example of OCD, right? Or you can imagine OCD with washing hands, being an issue, or you can imagine OCD in Pesach being an issue. I'm currently dealing with someone, who has severe OCD, probably the most severe case of OCD that I've ever encountered. And I still don't know exactly what to do there and how to help her, but we're working through it. We had an hour conversation yesterday before I came here. We had an hour conversation the week before. I'm still not any closer to finding a real solution. Very severe OCD. Her mind plays tricks on her, and also always complicates the conversation, right? So even if I say to her, what, we've gotten into a situation, right, where her parents, who have been dealing with her for a long time, just to give you an example, told me, you just have to tell her that everything is pikuach nefesh and she's patur from everything, or else she'll ask on everything. So you know what? I tried that. You know what happened yesterday? I said to her, you know what? Let's assume that you're patur from everything. You're exempt from everything. Okay? She said, why? I said, let's assume that every time that you feel that, it's pikuach nefesh for you. She said, okay, but certain things aren't doche pikuach nefesh, right? Killing, avodah zara, and gilui arayos. So even if it's pikuach nefesh, I have to keep those things. So how do I know I'm not killing? Now I said, why would you think you're killing? She said, well, could be I'm killing someone. Could be, right? Her OCD is like that, meaning it's like the butterfly effect. It's like chaos, like, maybe something I'm doing is causing someone to die somewhere, et cetera, right? That's, even if you say pikuach nefesh, it's not going to help, because she'll say, well, maybe I am doing avodah zara. I said, why would you be doing avodah zara? One time I told my dog, I love my dog. I really love my dog. That's like avodah zara. No, I'm like worshiping the dog, et cetera, et cetera. Every little thing, right? So it was really, really difficult for her. Really, really difficult. And I'm still trying to figure out, it's not just about, the psak. It's about what language is going to help her and how we're going to get over the fact that every single thing she thinks is a doubt. She thinks it's doubtful whether she's killing someone or not. Okay, so the language needs to also, find some work over there to be able to help her to take away the distress, that she's feeling. But that's just by way of example, right? So OCD, like I said, you couldn't have imagined that scenario. You couldn't have imagined that sort of conversation, right? But that's what happens, okay? OCD and halacha appears in so many areas. And avodah zarah is just one example, okay? But let's say on Purim, I don't know if the rabbi does this or not, right? But some rabbis on Purim will say, let's try to keep it down. We have to hear every word. To hear every word, for someone with OCD, that's a tough call, yeah? There's someone who told me this year, she managed to only read half the Megillah. What does she mean by that? She means that because of her OCD, every year she sits with a kosher Megillah and she just reads with the Baal Koreh. She doesn't trust that she hears anything properly, right? So therefore she just sits with a kosher Megillah and she just reads, right? So she said she managed this time to be Yotzei half the Megillah from the Baal Koreh and only read the second half, etc. She managed to do that. That was like a success for her, yeah? In that sense, right? Okay, so once again, we have to find the right language also to help with OCD. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that later. Okay, so OCD questions. They could come up really in any field. I'm telling you, I've seen it all. I think I've seen it all, but there's a lot of stuff. And it definitely comes up in places that you wouldn't even imagine. Okay, eating disorders. Lots of shilas in eating disorders. Okay, once again, you probably know about Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av and whether you need to fast, if you have anorexia or bulimia or binge eating disorder, etc., which are, of course, significant questions. But it can come up also in other things. I get asked a lot about waiting 6 hours or 3 hours, etc. If a person has a certain eating plan, right? Then, okay, maybe if I eat meat now, right, then I won't be able to eat milk, etc. But according to my eating plan, I need to do it, right? So can I shorten it to 3? Can I change it around, etc., etc.? What happens come Pesach, right? You might say, well, what's the problem? You just move to a Pesach diet, right? It's not so simple. Sometimes with eating disorders you can do that, and sometimes it's a lo pashut, right? It's not so clear that a person can do that. I had a case, with someone with ARFID. I don't know if you know ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. It's like I would say a step before anorexia on some level, but it's when a person is very restrictive in terms of the things that they're willing to eat, usually at a younger age. Okay, so I had a few parents this year before Pesach tell me they had a kid with ARFID and autism or ARFID and OCD. The connection is that in all those cases there's a certain rigidity, right? If you know autism, you know that there's a certain rigidity with autism that comes with it, or with OCD there's also a certain rigidity, right? These individuals have a problem moving from a certain kind of diet to another kind of diet. All right, it's not so simple. And one father told me last year, he said, my younger daughter who was ARFID and ASD wouldn't eat. She just, we got to Pesach, she just fasted for 3 days until we found something that he said, I almost broke and gave her chametz. Yeah, but then I found one thing that she was willing to eat that was Pesach. You think that the big question is about kitniot. We can have the millionth discussion about whether kitniot is outdated or not if you really want to. Yeah, but I'm dealing with questions about chametz on Pesach. So it's definitely also a struggle. With regards to eating disorders and those things. Okay, here's one out of left field that I'm not sure that you've heard before. Okay, there was a young woman in the hospitalized, an eating disorder unit, okay? And she did not, so I don't know if you know how these things go, but, a lot of times you need to kind of force the person to eat at the beginning. Or sometimes you have to basically take away their phone or take away certain things in order to force them, right, to get them to start working, with the therapists, start working on the eating plan, et cetera, et cetera. So she was being forced to eat. So there's actually a discussion about achila be'ones, meaning if a person is eating but is being forced to eat, right, do they make a bracha? That's what she wanted to know. Do I make a bracha on the food that I'm being forced to eat? You might say, okay, really people ask that question? Yep, they ask that question. What can I tell you? Yeah, it's funny to think that people ask these questions, but they do. Even when a person is suffering significantly from a mental health issue, they're still religious. They still see themselves first and foremost as a religious person, and they want to do the right thing. They want to do the correct thing. That's important to them. Right? So they ask those questions. Yes, absolutely. All right? So there's certainly plenty of questions with eating disorders. I'll give you one last one. Some of these questions I'm happy to answer also later if you want me to. But right now we're going to put the answers aside, because if I answer every question, we're never going to get out of here. But going to mikveh, I never even thought about it until I was asked. Right? There was a woman with a history of anorexia and suicidal attempts, and she said to me, she said, every time, right, I go to mikveh, I'm like, it's an encounter with my body, right? So I'm looking at my body, I'm encountering my body, I'm seeing the scars of previous suicide attempts, et cetera, et cetera. It's a difficult reality, right, to be in that situation. And not only that, she said, then I have to go to the mikveh and I'm showing my body to another woman, et cetera. And that also could be triggering or traumatizing or whatever you want to call it, and do I really need to be doing this with the balanit, with the mikveh lady, or can I do it on my own, et cetera, et cetera. Right? I would never have thought about that, okay? But as you can see, the issue of the eating disorder can affect you in all kinds of ways and can be relevant in all kinds of situations that you would never even have considered, okay? Last few examples. Depression. The rabbi mentioned depression, anxiety. Sure. The number one question, by the way, that I get, which is very relevant to depression and anxiety, is can I use my phone on Shabbos? It's the number one question, okay? By far. Not like, oh, there's one that's really close to that. No, this is the number one question, okay? Can I use my phone on Shabbat? And people don't always understand, like, why does the person need to use their phone on Shabbat? So it's not just to call a therapist or something like that. It's to regulate themselves. The phone, statistically, there are people here with mental health challenges, okay? The phone is a significant coping mechanism. It's a significant coping mechanism during the week. And to not have it on Shabbat is a challenge, is a real challenge, okay? So we need to realize that. And I'll give you one example. It's a bit extreme, but it drives home the point, okay? Once a woman called me up. She said she had OCD, and she wanted to know whether she could use her phone to watch on Shabbat, to watch movies, whatever. So a lot of times when I get these calls, right, they start off very parv. It's like, I have OCD. Okay. Yeah, what's the problem? I have damaging thoughts, or I have thoughts, or whatever it is, right? She doesn't go into detail. There's a certain code that people speak in. I'm already used to the code. But a lot of times people don't want to say everything, and I'm also used to that. Most of the time, I feel like I'm not getting the full story, but that's okay. I always try to, because I realize that I try to guess the story, and most 9 times out of 10, the answer is, yeah, you guessed right. Yeah, but a lot of times it's just like, oh, I have OCD, and I need the phone. Okay. I delved into the story a little bit, and here's what I found out, okay? She was using bleach to clean her body. She was using gallons of bleach every day to clean her body, and she was causing burns all over her body as a result of this practice, to the extent that the doctors told her that she was at death's door if she would continue this way. And that conversation with the doctors happened 2 months before she called me. Then she told me, I'm not using as much bleach as I used to. Okay, that was the situation that we were in. And the phone, the watching, was helping her to regulate her use of the bleach. I told her it's pikuach nefesh. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, of course you can watch if you need to. But see, what the phone does, right, a lot of times is that the pain is in here. You need to get out of here. That's what you need. You need to get out of here and stop feeling the pain, stop feeling the distress, stop having all those thoughts that you're having that are very, very damaging to you. Get out of that and be able to be elsewhere, to be somewhere else. The phone helps you do that. It helps you get out of here. Right? So a lot of times, yes, people ask me, can they use their phone to listen to music, to watch something, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Pretty much the number one question that I get. Okay? And, sometimes when I speak to rabbis about that, I think they're a little bit surprised about the question. And they, of course, ask, well, is it really necessary, et cetera, et cetera? And then, of course, yes, you have to explain what it does for a person and how it helps them during the week and why it's so difficult to exchange that for something else. right? I once saw like an online answer. Someone said, I'm hospitalized, for whatever it was. I forget if it was depression or an eating disorder. I forget what the exact context was. And the person was asking, can I use my phone on Shabbos? And the rabbi said, this was the answer. This was an online answer, so it was obviously short and clipped. But the rabbi said, ask your family to bring you a really interesting book to read. That was the answer. There's a misunderstanding, okay, in that answer. And I'm not trying to say the rabbi was trying to say something bad. He just obviously didn't understand. First of all, my experience is, if someone's asking me whether they can use their phone on Shabbos, they've tried the book thing, okay? They've tried that, all right? It's not the first go-to, all right? People who ask shilas, here's like a news flash for people. People who ask shilas, they care about halacha. If they didn't care, they wouldn't be asking. If they didn't care, they would do whatever they wanted to do, if that's what they wanted. When they ask a shayla like that, and they're hospitalized, okay? They're right now in the unit, meaning something significant, something acute happened, right? That's what you should know, right? The rabbi, when he's reading that shayla, he should say to himself, okay, this person is right now in the hospital. They're right now in a situation where obviously something acute occurred, right? They're obviously in some sort of distress, and they're dealing with that distress. Okay, now on top of that, they're asking a shayla, meaning they're trying to deal with their distress, but still remain religious. That's important to them, okay, obviously. So now, what do you think happened? You think they didn't try all the other stuff? Because a lot of times they did. Yes, they tried talking to a friend and playing board games and reading books and going for walks and doing this and that and the other, et cetera, and all the stuff that you think that you can offer to them that is going to exchange the phone, they've tried it, okay? But if you really want to go through the motions with them, you can, And of course, I always tell people, look, if there's another way, then of course you should do it. But, in terms of the phone, so and so. But of course, if there's a way that we don't have to be Mechal Shabbos, of course, if there's a way to do it without the phone, then we do it without the phone, obviously. But a lot of times they've tried that. The reason that they're calling me, all right, is because it's a last resort. Because the last time they tried that, it didn't work out. The last time they tried that, it ended up, with them in the hospital. Ended up with, suicidal ideation or something along those lines, right? That's the problem, okay? There was a young woman who contacted me. Her boyfriend died after October 7th, not in October 7th, but in the war, right? In other words, he was a soldier, etc. And she's suffering significant PTSD, okay? So what was happening with her? So I'm not going to start explaining what PTSD is at length, but she was definitely dissociating, definitely like she was losing consciousness. Like she was crossing the street and losing consciousness in the middle of the road. Like there were cars zooming around her, okay? But besides that, she was also suicidal. And not just suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts, etc. By the way, her last shayla to me, okay, which she asked, was after a suicide attempt. What did she ask me? I don't know if you can guess. You can't guess. She asked me, does she say hagomel for being saved from her suicide attempt? That was her shayla. Yeah? So it's a really good question, actually. Yeah, because if it's self-inflicted, do you say hagomel for something that's self-inflicted? There's a machloket about it. It's a discussion, actually, in the poskim. Whatever. The answer is yes, by the way. I told her, of course, she should say hagomel. Because I didn't want her to think that the fact that she's alive is like a parv issue. Like, well, there's different opinions on that. There are no different opinions on it. It's good you're alive. Yeah? So, definitely say hagomel for that, and that's that. Rather, you have to factor that in, of course, like what message you're sending. You may know the halakhic discussion, but it's not always right to share that with the person. You have to understand where their situation is and what their situation is and be able to give them the psak that they need, right? But the point is that, she told me, can I use my phone on Shabbat in order to regulate those feelings? I told her, it's pikuach nefesh, what's going on with you? She was still very reticent to do it. And she did not do it the next time that she had those thoughts. She tried to do other things, etc. And she landed back in the hospital after a suicide attempt, etc. So, we can't take chances with these things, right? So like I said, I train a lot of rabbis, and I understand why people sometimes raise kind of like their eyebrow at me and like, is that really necessary? Yeah, and I say to people, yeah. First of all, it's necessary. And number two, the phone, I think, at most, right, is a derabanan. It's a rabbinic prohibition. Okay, if you have a person I remember, in our shul, right, I had a person who lost consciousness. They pulled out the defibrillator, they called Hatzalah, etc. I'm guessing, I'm not a doctor. I'm guessing there could be like 1,000 reasons why a person would lose consciousness, and 990 of them are not life-threatening. And yet, we treat it like a full-blown emergency if someone, loses consciousness. We'll call Hatzalah, we'll do whatever we need to do, et cetera, because we don't take chances. Okay, so if you don't take chances with someone who loses consciousness, why are you taking chances with someone who has depression and has a history of suicidal attempts? Like, why are we taking any chances with that? Why are we hedging our bets on that? And saying, well, maybe they don't need the phone. Maybe they do, right? So if maybe they do, and it's a rabbinic prohibition at most. So let's go with that. You know what I'm saying? Let's go with that option, because I really think that we need to take mental health much more seriously, okay? And we're going to talk about that now also a little bit more. But that's a few of the kinds of questions that I get, and I hope I've convinced you that I'm busy. We're good? There's what to discuss, right? You understand what I do with my life now, yes? Okay, this is the topic. This is mental health and halacha. This is the world of mental health and halacha, okay? There are many disorders, and there are many places where those disorders touch upon religious life. And I mentioned a lot of the halakhic dilemmas, but I sprinkled in there a few other considerations as well. And yes, I'm seeing more and more that there are also non-halakhic dilemmas, meaning spiritual dilemmas, philosophical dilemmas, et cetera, et cetera. Like a lot of those things are also coming up. And I'm writing a separate book on that now to discuss those things. And maybe if there's time at the end, I'm happy to talk about what that book is about. Okay, that was part 2 of this talk, was to explain a little bit about the world of halacha and mental health. And later on, I'll go back to that a little bit and try to give you some of the cases of what I would say to them, et cetera, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Everyone still with me? Okay, we're good? Okay, wonderful. Part 3. What I think is really important for us to also realize is why this is so important. Now, you might say, it's mental health, of course it's important. Yes, of course, right? And I hope everybody here in the room feels, like this is such important work that you're doing. But why? Why? At the end of the day, what I'm talking about is halacha. It's a niche, right? It's my niche. I do this thing. You know how you ever been some rabbis? I'm not going to call the rabbi out here, right? But you know how some rabbis, they rehash the same stuff all the time. You know what I'm talking about? They have their thing. Like that rabbi, whenever he gets up, he talks about Israel. Whenever he gets up, he talks about Shemitah. Whenever he gets up, he talks about Mikdash. That's his favorite topic. He loves korbanot. It's like his wonderful, et cetera, et cetera. That's his thing. You know what I'm saying? He has a shtick. We all know what the rabbi. We've heard that one. Yeah. Okay. So I found a shtick, right, of mental health. Shkoyach. I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not healing people. I'm not giving them tools to deal with, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just paskening on issues of mental health. And yet, when I started off, people were telling me, wow, it's amazing, it's a geulah, it's a redemption, this thing, it's so... And honestly, I was thinking to myself, cool, but why? Why is this so impressive to people? And what I realized was that I'm saying halacha, but a lot of people, what they're hearing is stigma. In other words, I'm talking about halacha, but what everyone else is experiencing on some level is the destigmatization of mental health within the Jewish community. And let me explain why that is, okay? Halacha is a very special field within Judaism, okay? You ever been to a shiur, right? And then someone quotes a medrash, and then someone is like, it's just a medrash. I always feel bad for the midrashim, just a medrash. Rabbi Akiva said something, Rabbi Yeshua says but no one, is that someone? Is that okay. But no one seems to care. You know what I'm saying? No one seems to care that a Tana said something in the medrash. If it's a medrash, it's like, okay, no big deal, right? We can, right? Or if someone has a nice idea at the Shabbos table, right? You feel comfortable to disagree with that, right? Even though it's based on Rashi or based on Ramban, yeah. For some reason, you couldn't care less. Yeah, you're like, well, it's what it is. I disagree with that, etc. Right? Or maybe the rabbi has given a drasha that you've can't be. I know rabbi. Can't be that the rabbi has given a drasha you've disagreed with. I've been a community rabbi for 17 years. No one's ever disagreed with the drasha that I've said. That's for sure. Everyone always just comes up to me after the drasha, shkoyach, shkoyach, I agreed with every word. Yeah, right. Anyway, obviously, we feel free to disagree, right? But if I quoted a Mishnah Berurah, no one would ever say, it's just a Mishnah Berurah. I've never heard that. I never heard that line. I've heard it's just a Midrash. I've never heard it's just a Mishnah Berurah. I don't, because Mishnah Berurah is the Mishnah Berurah. No. If it's a Mishnah Berurah, it's not just a Mishnah Berurah. That's halacha. That we have to contend with. You want to disagree with the Mishnah Berurah? You have to have broad shoulders, is a term we use. Right? You have to have broad shoulders, right? You have to bring someone of equal weight, or you have to bring a big posek, or you have to show why, or, et cetera, et cetera. You cannot just discount the Mishnah Berurah. There has to be a reason why you're doing that. The law is the law. We treat the law differently than a nice idea, even if it's said by a great man. So if I stood here and I said really, really nice things about mental health, and I showed you how sensitive I am and all that stuff, it would all be very nice. But then if after all that, when someone was suffering on Shabbos, I said, well, I'm not sure they could really use their phone, I'm not sure that we're getting the point across, right? That it really is so important. But when I say you can use your phone on Shabbos, right, the reason that people here might instinctively feel a little bit taken aback, like, is that really kosher? Yeah? Why are you feeling that way? You're feeling that way because of what it means, because it means something. If it didn't mean anything, you wouldn't feel that way. You wouldn't feel that feeling. That's like, that's a bit, it's a bit on the fence. Yeah? That's why rabbis feel that way when they hear that. Because what I'm basically telling them is, I really believe this person is suffering. And I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is. I'm willing to say, there is real suffering going on with that individual. And he really needs help. And he really needs assistance. And in the same way that halacha takes into account physical ailments, it will take into account mental ailments. And yes, I'm willing to say that. And yes, I'm willing to also paskin that in the requisite cases. Right? That is the power of the halachic language, is that it makes things real. It grounds things. Unlike the Medrash, unlike the commentaries on the Torah, unlike all the nice ideas, unlike the Musar books, which are very important and are very significant and have impact on our lives. But the halachic language makes it real. And that's what people with mental health struggles need. They need to be seen. They need for their pain not to be transparent. They need to feel like people understand them and see what they're going through. And I have seen the halachic language have that effect time and again. Whenever I give people a psak, it is not just about the action. It's about this relief, right? That I've seen what's going on, that I understand what's going on. Okay? Well, let me give you one example of that, just to show you what I mean by that. Okay? I was once in Silver Spring, Maryland, right? Maryland. Yeah, I think that's where it is. Yeah. I was once there for a Shabbos. It was like 2 or 3 years ago, I forget. And mincha of Shabbos, a woman came up to me, and a young woman, she said she wanted to talk. I said, I don't have time right now, but we could do Motzei Shabbos. Anyway, Motzei Shabbos, she came to where I was staying. We spoke for an hour and a half. An hour and a half we spoke. What was the question that sparked an hour and a half conversation? Okay? Here was the shaila that I was asked. She said to me, Rabbi, I bring in Shabbos whenever I want. Okay? That's how she started off. I bring in Shabbos whenever I want, meaning if I'm doing my makeup, I don't stop because Shabbos came in. I'll finish what I'm doing and then I'll bring it in when I'm done. Or if I'm on my phone or on my computer and I'm working on something, I'll do that. And then later on, I'll bring in Shabbat. Right? So I'll bring in Shabbat whenever I want to bring it in. And a lot of times it's certainly after Shkia, and also after Tzeis, also after, like the stars come out, it could be a long time. Okay, that's great. That was not the question. What was the question? Then she says to me, when I'm ready to bring in Shabbos, I want to light candles. Can I light candles? Okay. Now, this is a very strange question. It's an interesting question, but it's a very strange question. Right? When you hear a question like that, right, then once again you have to ask yourself what's behind the question, right? Because it's not every day I get a shaila like that. Okay, well, once again, this turned into an hour and a half conversation. You know why? Because for the next half an hour after she asked me the question in the way that she asked me, I said to her, let's back it up. Let's back it up 1 second. Let me hear a little bit about what's, who you are, what's going on with you, et cetera, et cetera. And here is more or less what she told me. She told me she had been dealing with depression for about 10 years. Her husband, they've been married for about 3-4 years, had been dealing with depression for 7 years. The families, there was a long, complicated history about how they got married. Excuse me. But the gist of it was the families were against it, and they were kind of like estranged from their families. He was not working. She had just started a job. They had moved to Silver Spring not long before, so they also had no friends. And on top of all that, she said that about a month prior to that, her husband came out as trans, and he wanted to transition to becoming a woman, but still remain married to her. And she was asking about the candles, okay? Like that was the problem. Like the issue was the candles. So it's really interesting, right? Because a lot of times, right, what we see, all right, is that, I'm not trying to say that she didn't want an answer to the candles question. She did. But it's really interesting how like a person can have a lot of turmoil going on in their lives, and somehow it all ends up in like one small halachic point that's the thing that I really need to ask the rabbi about, because that's where it ended up, right? Everything, it's like a house of cards, right? So she built up this house of cards. She's somehow keeping her life together. It's stitched in a very specific way, but this specific way that she's stitched it together has led her to this one minute shaila, right? But really what it's about on some level is recognizing her distress and recognizing her pain and seeing what's going on with her. And if I hadn't asked those questions, right, then I could have just told her, look, this is a real problem. You can't light candles once Shabbos comes in, right? Like, you can't do that, so you'll just have to do your best, right? And that's what I would have said if I wouldn't have asked those questions. What did I say? Let me tell you what I did say, by the way. Because after speaking to her for a long time, and I realized that she was just looking for something to control, okay? Meaning her life was falling apart, okay? And I know that I'm not a psychologist, but my interpretation of this was she needed something to control, right? And for her it was when Shabbos comes in, whatever that means, So therefore, and she also mentioned that before she started doing that, she had an eating disorder. Once she started doing that, she didn't have a problem with the eating. That's also control. Anyway, doesn't matter. The point is, I understood what it was coming from. So I said to her like this, I said to her, look, how about this? How about when Shabbos comes, when Shkia comes, right? You light the candles, but don't make a bracha on them. Continue whatever you're doing, and then when you're ready, come back to the candles and make a bracha, right? That's what I suggested to her to do. Even that, she said to me, I'll try. She wasn't sure she could do that. Yeah, because it would relinquish something of the control that she was, trying to create for herself. Now, in that situation, it was not right for me to come and say to her, look, you really just got to keep Shabbos like everybody else. You got to bring it in. It's really easy for me to get on a plane the next day, go back to Israel, and leave her with her crumbling, tower of cards, because I just pulled out something from under her, et cetera. Now she has to stitch everything back together. I could easily do that, obviously, but it wasn't the right thing, right? The right thing, she didn't ask me about that. She didn't ask me about whether it's okay that she brings in Shabbos whenever she wants. She also knows that I would be against that, right? That was not the question. The question was how to deal with Shabbos candles, because she wants some sort of connection. She does want to continue to be connected in some way. She doesn't want to lose that. And it's important for me that she doesn't lose that, right? So for me, the goal, the focus over there was for her to be seen. And the way I did that was by not telling her, you have to bring in Shabbos when everyone else brings it in. That is a recognition of her pain and her distress. But on the other hand, yes, to connect her in some way without, once again, that's the third piece, without relinquishing the halacha. I didn't feel that I could tell her to light candles on Shabbos. Yeah? So therefore, that's a deoraisa, it's a Torah prohibition. I could never do that in that situation and feel it was right. Didn't think there was any way that I could excuse that. So I told her, look, try to light the candles before, but hold off on the bracha. The bracha is the time that you'll bring in Shabbos, and that you'll make whenever you're ready. You can come back to them whenever you're ready, and then you'll make the bracha on the candle. So a lot of times people say to me, What's the big deal with what you do? You just paskin you look in the sources, you paskin. That's the big deal. The big deal is that it's in the language of Chazal, chokhmah hi ve'ina melacha. It's not just, a science. It's more of an art, more of an art form. You need to understand where the person's coming from. You need to understand, right, their background. You understand what's happening. You need to see them. They need to feel seen. Probably the main thing that they need is to feel seen. They need to know that. That's why people come to me. Seriously. People say, oh, they come to you because you're known as like the mental health guy. That's half true. Okay? I think that the real reason that they come to ask me shaylas is because they don't have to explain too much. They know I get it. They know I chop it. They like, oh, he'll get it. He'll get it. Yeah? They don't have to explain. They don't have to excuse themselves. They don't have to try and convince me that what the pain that they're going through is real. They already feel seen. That's a big part of it. It's a really big part. When someone feels like they won't get the answer that they need, not that they want, not be lenient for me, the answer that they need, meaning that really makes them feel like a whole person, that makes them feel like they can still be religious, because that's what people want. They want balance. They don't want a leniency. Okay? They want balance. They want to be religious and deal with their mental health. That's what they want. They don't want just do whatever you want. That's not going to help anybody. I'm telling you from experience. Okay? It's not about giving the most lenient option. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with striking a balance for the person so that they're able to be also religious and deal with their mental health. When they get that, when they have that peace, that's where the magic happens. Okay? That's what this field is all about. So that's mental health at halacha. That's the significance, the importance of it, right? Like I said, why is what I'm doing so important? Going back to that question, okay? So what I realized was it destigmatizes halacha. If there's any way to destigmatize halacha within the Jewish community, within the Orthodox community, this is it. Halacha is a significant part of that. Because once again, if we speak in all the best language, in all the most flowery language, if we wax poetic about it, until tomorrow, it's all very nice. But does the person feel seen? Does the person feel like their needs are being addressed? Does the person feel like their distress is being taken seriously and their pain and their suffering is truly present, in the discussion? If yes, then we've done our job. If no, then we missed. Then we didn't do what we were supposed to do. Okay? Okay, so that was that. I have about 15 minutes or so. So I'm going to use them to come back to a few of the cases. I wanted to explain a little bit about my process. Okay, I think we'll do that, and then I'll open up for whatever you guys want to talk about. But I wanted to explain a little bit about my process, so you'll understand it, and then to show you how I apply that to different situations. So let's talk about one of the ways that I do this is by comparing OCD to PTSD. Okay? So you might say, what does that mean? Right? You'll see in a second what that means. I answer shilas of OCD and PTSD very, very differently. In fact, almost opposite. Why? So we have to understand OCD and we have to understand PTSD in order to be able to understand how to answer them. Rabbis, many times, like explaining stuff. Perhaps you noticed this trait of ours. Perhaps you've been to Shurim where there's 35 sources. Great. Yeah. Looking forward to this year. Yeah. So, yeah, we like giving a lot of sources, and we like explaining stuff. We don't want people to think, that we pulled a rabbit out of a hat. I want you to know where I got it from. I'm going to explain, etc. That's why Nafshi BiShe'elati is so long. I try to explain things, at great length. Because I wanted to cover all my bases, and I wanted the rabbinic community to also trust what's going on over there. I want them to understand where I was getting my stuff from, etc. So even though here I haven't actually spoken about one source, I don't think so far, but all the information's in the book, and you're always welcome to look and see, where everything's from. You won't do it, but that's okay. I forgive you. It's okay. You can trust me. It's all in there. But the point is that we do like to explain things, and yet, with OCD, I do not explain almost ever. Explaining something to someone with OCD is almost always a bad idea, all right? Because the OCD will prey on the explanation, right? So like the individual who said to me that every thought they had going through their mind is a vow, is a neder, right? So they thought that every single thing that they were thinking, now they had to do. They called me up and they asked me that, and I told him, I said, what's, okay, so I'm happy to help you. He said, well, before you answer me, I wanted you to know, I asked another rabbi, he gave me an answer, it was terrible. I said, what was the answer that the rabbi gave you? So he said to me, the rabbi told me that if on Yom Kippur I heard Kol Nidre, then I'm good. It covers everything. Yeah? So I said, okay, now I understand what happened. Yeah? So what happened? Right? The rabbi said to him, Kol Nidre covers everything. Now the person is like, okay, I wasn't shul for Kol Nidre, but did I hear every word? And did I have kavana to be yotze in every single thing? And did the person, the chazan, was he mechaven on me? Did he even know I was in the room? You know, et cetera, et cetera. The OCD starts preying on the reasoning, right? So many times you don't give reasons in cases of OCD, because the OCD will just pick apart at the reason and you won't get out of it. All right? So therefore, what I many times tell people is, this is the halacha. That's it. Okay? That's the halacha. When a woman who is preparing too much for mikvah, right? So she's preparing hours and hours and hours for mikvah, right? In ways that are sometimes she even bruises herself, you know, in certain ways, how much she's cleaning her body, you know, etc. Right? A lot of times I say, put a clock on it. You prepare for half an hour. That's it. What if I don't do this? What if I don't do that? Half an hour. Start with the shower. Whatever you get done, you get done. That's it. 30 minutes. We'll go 45 minutes, 45 minutes. But that's it. 45 minutes. You can say that if you want. Okay? That's a very clear, delimited sort of directive. Okay? And they can't play with that. Right? So you say that. If someone says, and I've had this, it will say, all you need to do is make sure that you wash your hair well. Well. Ooh. That's not good. That's going to be trouble, right? So you don't want to put people in that situation. You have to give them very, very clear directives, right? You know, and if you're familiar with ERP, then it also kind of like works with ERP on some level. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, okay? But the point is, yes, it also works a lot of times therapeutically. You know, it works with the therapy that the person is going through. Either way, we need clear directives. We try not to leave things to ambiguity because it just makes people suffer, and therefore also we don't give reasons. I certainly don't tell people there's a machloket. That's not happening. Yeah. Well, there are two opinions. There are not two opinions. Yeah. For people with OCD, there's one opinion. This is the opinion, the one that I'm telling you, and that's that. With PTSD, it's the opposite. Because in PTSD, many times what happens to the person is that they need to regain agency. Right? I mean, in an extreme case, right, let's say of rape, right? The woman feels like she didn't have any control over the situation, right? She lost agency. She lost control, right? She couldn't protect herself. Or in the war, right? If you witnessed your friends, you know, dying and you couldn't save them and you couldn't do anything for them, once again, you lost agency. You lost the ability to choose. You lost the ability to control the environment, to control what's happening, right? So in that situation, what you need is more agency. And if the rabbi controls the situation, a lot of times that's not good. I'm not saying for everyone. All these things are not, also with OCD, it's not for everyone. I said a rule, but obviously you realize there are exceptions to the rule. But with everything that I'm saying, I think the rule is correct. In other words, with PTSD, what you want to give a person is agency. I would tell someone with PTSD who was asking me a shaila, I would say to him, here are a few options, for sure. I would definitely open up the conversation. I would say, let's think what's best for you. Yeah? There's this opinion, there's that opinion, there's this opinion. You know, where do you feel most comfortable? You know, what do you feel, you know, will be best for you? I would never say that with OCD, but I would definitely say it with PTSD, because I think what the person needs is not to feel like he's hemmed in by halacha and that the rabbi is controlling the decision, you know, et cetera, but that there's a conversation, there's a back and forth, right? I'm trying to get him to take control over the situation and move towards a solution that is best for him, right? So that's going to be the situation, right? With PTSD, it's going to be a different kind of answer, right? A person who can't daven. I'm having more and more of those after October 7th, after everything, you know, et cetera, after what they've went through, what they've seen. It's very hard to go back to daven, go back to shul for a lot of reasons, right? But yes, also the faith part of it, but not just the faith part of it. It's just hard to be around people. I think we also have to understand, and once again, you may all know this, but I've been seeing this more and more. People who come back from the war, they want everything to be the same but different. Okay, I don't know if you know what I mean. What I mean by that is, it's like my son, okay, Yitzchak. My son was in Gaza, all right? Not for a very long time. He was there, and also not at the beginning. He was there like, I don't know, 3-4 months ago, okay? He was in Gaza. We were worried about him, of course, like every parent. And, it was definitely, like things happened there while he was there. But, okay, Baruch Hashem, he's okay. But what I couldn't get over was on some level, and he does not have PTSD, but what I could not get over was the contrast. In other words, he comes home, right? He was, let's say, 3 weeks in Gaza, right? Then he comes home. And then what do we say to him? First of all, we give him a hug and a kiss and everything, of course. But a few hours later, what do we say to him? Oh, can you take out the garbage? Can you do the dishes? Can you, et cetera, et cetera? Like nothing happened. It's like olam hafuch. It's like a different world, right? I mean, he was like in a war zone 2 seconds ago, possibly putting his life in danger. And the next second, like do this, do that, all the mundane stuff. And on some level, even though our hearts are always, with the soldiers and this and that, whether you're living here in the city or in Israel, in Beit Shemesh, where I live, it doesn't really matter, right? You're always thinking, of course, about those things. But let's be honest. We go about our daily lives. We go about our day to day. So do I, right? It's not like I stopped everything. I teach, I go, I do my stuff, I answer people's shilas, I post on Facebook, I do this and that and the other. Like nothing happened, right? On some level. Our lives continued. But people who come back, they want to come back into their routine. They want to come back as if nothing has happened. But has nothing happened? And there's a stark contrast there. Because 2 seconds ago I was fighting for my life, and guarding my base, and anything could have happened. And now I'm back, and my wife wants me to take the kids to school. And I want to take the kids to school. It's not that I don't want to. And I want to give them showers. I want to bathe them. I want to do those things. But I can't. I can't do those things. I want everything to be the same, but it's not the same. Right? So it's the same and not the same. Going back to shul is part of that. I want that routine. But can I really go back to that routine? Is it really the same? After everything I went through, and now the world is the same? I went through all that, and everything is it's all like it was before? It's so weird, right? It's so weird to do that. And we all want that for that person, like I said, and that person wants it for themselves, but it's not going to be the same. And that's what we need to realize, that a lot of times with trauma, it'll be the same, but not the same. They'll come back to their lives, but won't be able to fit exactly into their lives the way that they were before. There's a wife waiting, there are kids waiting, there's this and that, and yet it's not the same. And I'll end with one shaila that I got in that regard. Excuse me, just to explain, right? So, a person called me up. He was in Gaza for the first 3 months of the war. Mamash, I think he didn't come home for 3 months. I think he was literally inside and really in the worst conditions and saw a lot of terrible things and came back with severe PTSD. And called me up about a year and a half. He was there for the first 3 months, but he called me a year and a half after the war started, okay? He was obviously seeing a therapist, trying to get, stuff for his PTSD, and was probably working to some extent, but not perfect. And he says to me, I'm calling you because my wife asked me to call you. I said, okay, yeah. He said, here's the story. And then he tried to explain it to me. And I'm giving you the gist of it. Okay, the gist of it was this. They were not, there was no intimacy between them. Okay? But not because he didn't love her or didn't find her attractive. It wasn't that. It was, he didn't notice her. He was in his own world. He was in a bubble. Okay? That's how he put it. In other words, it's not that I'm not attracted to her. She's just not in my vision. I wake up in the morning, I'm like in a different place, So I'm at home, but I'm like as if I'm dissociated from the entire from everything that's going on. So I don't really take care of the kids at all. I don't go to work. I don't do almost anything. And I also don't pay any attention to her, right? And we're trying to get back to each other, but it's really, really difficult. And then he said to me, what was the shaila part? The shaila part was this. He said, she has a very short cycle, a menstrual cycle, yeah? So there aren't that many days in the month that we can even be together in the first place. So she wanted to know whether she can shorten it in some way, meaning that she can, let's say, do what they call today nida deoraita, meaning that she won't keep the 7 clean days, she'll just keep 7 days, and then once she's not seeing blood anymore, she'll go to mikvah, and that's it. She'll shorten that in order for them to have more days in the month that they could work on their relationship and somehow get back to each other, from that perspective. Of course, there was a lot of stuff in the background of that, meaning the house was kind of falling apart. They were even contemplating divorce. There was a lot of other stuff going on, but it was really difficult. This was really difficult for everyone. I think that if I would have told you at the beginning, right, of this talk that there was a connection between PTSD and nida deoraita, you'd be like, what the heck are you talking about? Yeah, like what's the connection between those two things? This is kind of like what I meant when I said that the questions can come from anywhere, because it's hard for us to imagine how a certain disorder is going to impact a person's religious life, right? We can't even imagine it. It's not something that we couldn't think of it on our own. Okay, life has a way of developing a certain situation, and in this scenario, that was the situation, right? Where he needed and she needed, they needed some way to, like I said, get back to their lives. People are going to try to slot back into their lives, but not be able to. And sometimes the halacha is going to be the thing that stands in their way. And we have to figure out how we create a process, long-term process, through which they can gradually return into their lives. If you understand PTSD and you understand that that's a gradual process for a lot of people, then you'll understand that you have to help create that process for the person. That it's not going to be just, okay, now you're going to come back and do all the things you did before. It's not going to work that way. You have to give options, like I said before, agency, control, etc. You have to give space, and you have to create that process so that the person can move forwards. You're probably wondering what I told that person. What I told that person was, I said to with shilas like this, I usually also consult with other rabbis. But the bottom line, the gist of it was, I said, I don't think that you should allow yourselves to have full-on sexual relations, but I think you could do negia. You can have hugs, kisses, etc. You can have touch. Okay, so she can go early to the mikvah, and you can have touch, and then she can go a second time, after the 7 clean days, and you can gradually, right, work your way, hopefully, in terms of your relationship and your marriage, in that way, right? So once again, a lot of times it's about finding that balance, meaning it's not about giving the most lenient position, because you don't want to compromise the person's religiosity. Remember that also could be, it's a double-edged sword. That could also be triggering and stigmatizing for a person. If a person feels like they're like second-class citizen religiously, that's also not great. Yeah. If you ever tried telling a person not to fast on Yom Kippur, then you've encountered that. Yeah. People don't want to not fast on Yom Kippur. That's not something people, oh yes, I don't have to fast. Yeah. Like we don't know. People feel I'm not fasting. Like what's the deal with that? Yeah. Like I have to fast. Everyone's fast. People want to feel like they're part of the community. They don't want to be just like jutted out, pushed out. They don't want that. They don't want that. They want to be part, right? So our goal is not ever, to provide extreme solutions if we can avoid them. Sometimes we have to give extreme solutions, but if there's a way to avoid them, we need to avoid them. We need to create that balance in a person's life where they still feel part and parcel of the religious community. But we do need to find and understand, first of all, the specific disorder and its characteristics, and work with that to chart out a course for that person to eventually get better. Okay, I think we'll stop here. And I guess if people want to ask questions or make comments, please.
Thank you so much. So informative. Do you require everybody who comes and asks you a question to make sure that they're seeing a mental health professional, like a therapist, if they're asking you, making sure that they're trying to get to the point that they can either go back to the full keeping of halacha, or just that stigma is a huge issue in multiple communities, and so I wonder if part of the answer is going to a mental health professional can also help those communities.
Great question. I always say, ההלכה היא הפתרון למצוקה, לא הפתרון לבעיה. Halacha is a solution to your distress, not to the problem. In other words, if you have a problem with OCD or PTSD or ADHD or depression or anxiety or whatever it is, halacha will not solve your problem, right? Telling that woman that she should put a clock on the mikvah, right, and just do 30 minutes and that's it, did not solve her problem, okay? She still has OCD. It may have solved her mikvah problem, but it did not solve her OCD, right? The halacha could be an answer to your distress, but it is not the answer to your problem, to your underlying issue, right? I once had Dr. Harris, who I wrote the book with, likes to tell the story that he once had a patient, who had trichotillomania, that is hair pulling disorder, right? So she was pulling her hair, all the time, and she was really, really worried about that. Then one day she came into the office, she said, good news. What's the good news? She said, I'm getting married to a chassid from Rachma Strivka. They shave their hair. Yeah. So she said, I've solved my problem. She did not solve her problem. Why? Because, she shaved her hair, 100%. Then what she started doing? Excoriation. She started picking at her flesh, etc. It just migrated. It migrated from this to this. Halacha, or minhag, to shave your hair, won't solve your problem. Just because you don't have hair doesn't mean you don't have your disorder. It just means you don't have hair to pick anymore. You'll pick at something else. Yeah? So it's the same thing over here. When I talk to someone, if I always, unless it's clear from the conversation, but I always ask them if they're seeing someone. Meaning I think it's important that they're seeing someone, etc., because I can't solve their problem. I want to make sure.
Require it, I guess, is part of following halacha, or no?
I mean, I don't really require. Well, I won't give them an answer if they're not seeing. I mean, I'm going to help them regardless.
Part of the solution in following halacha is to see.
Of course.
Is that part of the?
I mean, I certainly stress that, but I can't force anyone to do something they don't want to do. But yeah, of course, I definitely support it. Definitely make sure as much as I can that they're seeing someone, and believe what you're saying, 100%. Yeah.
Have you gotten any pushback to this whole approach from any of the communities already?
So I think the work that I did with the post-skim, which I mentioned at the beginning, really helped with that, right? I don't think that. Look, my affiliation, right, classically, I think people think of me as a modern Orthodox rabbi, religious Zionist, maybe a little bit more to the liberal side than the conservative side. But for some, I don't know, I'm not going to say for some reason, I think I know the reason, yeah? But Baruch Hashem, I've managed to touch all communities. So in the rabbinic trainings that I've had Haredi people come, I've had Hasidish people come, I've had what we call in Israel Chardal, meaning the Haredi Leumi, right? People who are more on the right within the religious Zionists. People who would have seriously never learned from me in any other context, okay? Because of the book, because of the work that we're doing, have come to. So I haven't seen any problem with that. And I even gave like a mini course, like rabbinic training for rabbis in LA about a year ago. And I got a wide range of rabbanim, to come to that. So I haven't seen any problem with that or any pushback. People, I think, realize, first of all, that the work that was done in the book was good work, and that we have the support, and that we see it in all the communities anyway. They need this information. It's important to them. So no, generally, I have not really received any pushback, Baruch Hashem. Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you find that there is a correlation between how, I would say, Judaic studies is taught, specifically in modern Orthodox to Orthodox schools, in terms of instilling kind of like a fear, like if you don't follow halacha, that can lead to guilt, either, leading someone down the anxiety OCD path of, if I don't do this, I have to do this. Or then there's the other side of the spectrum with more externalizing disorders like ADHD, the kid who's like, I can't sit through the whole Yom Kippur davening, like I need breaks, like this is too much. So have you noticed like anything, regarding how schools approach these topics?
Look, it's difficult to know what to answer to that. Not because I don't understand what you're asking. I do understand it. The only question is always what the alternative is. So I'm putting that as a caveat, okay? It's an important caveat because I can criticize what's going on right now till tomorrow. The question is, do I have a better system? Yeah? And always with regards to schools, right? I find schools, personally, to be the most complex systems, meaning there's always like, you have to take into account the students and the parents and the teachers and everyone has something else. They're all pulling in different directions. Like, people say communities are complicated. I think schools are more complicated than communities, and I, a lot of times, like say, I don't know what to do with that, yeah? But with all that said, with that caveat, okay? My answer to your direct question is, yeah, I do think there's a problem with that. I do find that a lot of times we teach things in ways that may be effective in the short term, but in the long term do scar, on some level, okay? Like, for example, you gave one example, I'll give a different example. One of my least favorite lines, okay, which if it helps you, then great, yeah? Like, I'm not saying leave that aside. If it helps you, then good, yeah? One of my least favorite lines is, God doesn't give you anything you can't handle. Do not like that line, okay? Have not seen it play well with mental health, at all, okay? And generally, I also don't even know what it's really based. Like, I challenge you to find the safer that says it, yeah? I'm not sure that that really is a classic source that mamish, stipulates that, but okay, fine, yeah? People seem to think that it's like one of these like obvious truths, obvious spiritual truths that everybody should know, and I'm sure that for some people it helps. Yeah, I'm sure, by the way, that that's true. I'm sure some people hear that and they say, okay, it gives me strength to know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wouldn't give me this if I couldn't handle it. And then I find the internal strength to do it, and etc. But if you're very weak, then that only makes you feel worse. Like if you're not feeling well, yeah, then when you hear that, what you're hearing is, I'm not trying hard enough. I'm obviously not trying hard enough, or else I could do it, So if I'm a failure, I'm a total failure, et cetera, like that's not great, yeah? So some of these truths, so to speak, right, are peddled as like universal and obvious, and they're not very helpful, right? Telling, putting the fear of God into people, might sometimes, be work in the short term. I'm not sure that in the long term, that's the best idea, is to make people afraid, and I do get that, like afraid of hell, afraid of the retribution, of the consequences of this and this and that. Once again, for some people, actually could help. I'm not denying that, okay? It's just that for some people, it's not like that. I'll give you an example. I was once talking to a group of people who are in the field, people who are also with their own challenges, but also are like, they're part of a nonprofit trying to help people. Anyway, one of the women there said to me, you know what really helps me? Yeah, Sheva ipol tzadik vekam. It's a pasuk. Yeah, means the tzaddik will many times fall 7 times, but then get up again. He'll fall. Sheva ipol. He'll fall again, but he'll get up. He'll fall again, and he'll get up. He'll fall again and again. Sheva ipol tzadik vekam. I always recite that pasuk to myself. Yeah, it helps me. And then after she said that, someone else in the room piped up and said, it helped me until I fell 8 times, and then I was like, the pasuk said 7. So then, obviously, I'm never going to get up again. Yeah? Okay. Some people take it literally, and it doesn't help them. Some people, hear that pasuk, and it helps them. Right? So, look, far be it from me to tell people what will help them, what won't, because everyone's different. But, yeah, some of this messaging definitely needs to be tempered, let's put it that way, tempered with other messaging, and to show people that there are more than one way, there is more than one way to look at these things.
Yeah, you're doing awesome work. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
I wonder what your thoughts are on this. When I lost a parent about 7-8 years ago, I found that rabbis that I spoke to about how all of that was taking a toll on my mental health. They had were very lost, especially in terms of how, of the restrictions, which I know are not all halacha, but how that takes a toll on someone's mental health. And if you feel the time you have spent doing this work, if you feel like that has become more a part of the conversation, because although it's not, diagnosable in the DSM, it is something that everyone is going to go through eventually.
Loss of a parent.
Just loss in general.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. You're asking me whether I have seen, whether I understand that loss, or whether I've seen ways to deal with it. Like, what are you asking me exactly?
If how, especially Shloshim, the year after,
okay.
Kind of what that whole experience looks like, and the impact. I know it took a real big toll on my mental health. Like how, if that has become more a part of the conversation in the rabbinic space.
Okay. It's hard for me to speak about what has or hasn't become discussion in the rabbinic space, not because I'm a rabbi, but I don't hang out with all the other rabbis all the time. We don't have like a club, yeah? So it's hard for me to tell you exactly, what's happening. Usually rabbis hang out with congregants, not with other rabbis. So, it's which is what happens. But from I would say, I think that for sure, yes, meaning that's my feeling. For sure there is a sensitivity to it, that there wasn't before. It's maybe slow sometimes. Yeah, obviously in your experience, that was not present 8-9 years ago, right? That clearly that from what you said. But I do think that there is more and more understanding, and I'll just make a halachic observation that within the laws of Avelos, there is a lot of flexibility anyway. So it's easier, I think, also for Rabbanim to take into account certain things in that field. And so, all in all, I do think so. I have a chapter in the book about Ilchot Avelut. It needs to be expanded. There's more stuff that has come up over the years that I can now put in there, right? But for example, the issue of listening to music, even during Shiva, certainly Shloshim, a year, for someone who is suffering from depression or this or that or the other, right? That's in there, right? And other things are also. So there's definitely what more to do, but there's a lot there.
I have a suggestion. Could we take some questions together?
Oh.
We'll kind of answer.
Okay.
Because a lot of people have questions. So
Okay.
raise your hand if you have a question. So let's go start with Levi. Let's go one at a time.
Is someone going to write this down, or should someone have a right? But can I have a pen or something? I don't know.
I'll give you a pen.
Or I think I left my phone downstairs. So if someone could write it down, that would be great. You're going to write it down? Okay, he'll write it down. Go. Okay, let's see. We have a volunteer. What are the questions?
I'm curious if you have a bunch of examples of how you were able to find flexibility with halacha. The question is if you're ever not able to find any flexibility, which could have really, or could not work with someone's mental health with halacha, and it could really still hurt them. But you say, oh, there's not halacha.
Okay. Cases where there are no answers. Okay, that's number one. You're writing, or should I ask her to write? She has a pen out. Oh, she was giving me. Wow. Thank you. Okay, no, I got this now. Good. Okay. Okay. Yes. Other questions. Okay.
The question is, someone doesn't have a disorder, and there's no sense that there's who have manifestation, but they're suffering tremendously. There's a tremendous amount of mental distress. So I'm thinking in maybe the loss of Nita is causing this not mental distress.
Yep.
Or homosexuality prohibition.
Okay.
Does a derisa ever fall? Can you ever mitigate? Or, does it ever can you ever be lenient on a derisa?
Where there is no diagnosis, and there's no pikuach nefesh.
But their life is miserable.
Okay.
And then the same thing with Durabana.
Okay. Obviously, your questions are not interesting to some people. Just saying. Not my fault. They were here for my thought. Okay. Yeah.
Like a comment, something you spoke about a bunch was that sort of the clinical approach, what is advised for how to speak with a person and what a person needs in their condition influences stuff that you make.
Sure.
And sometimes sometimes it works and you can find it, and it's like an art that you can actually find a solution that doesn't come at the expense of the halacha, and sometimes they're actually in their contradiction, like in the case with benching a gomel and
suicide.
And suicide, right. So in that case, it was very obvious to which direction you should lean, whether it's like go with the clinical
Yes.
or to go with the halacha.
Yes.
My question is, have you been stumped, or have you reached a point where it was really hard to reconcile something that was in direct contradiction with the clinical advisement of how you should clinically treat something? Is there something that still sits with you, or that was really, really hard at the time?
Where the clinical advice and the halachic advice is at odds. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Sorry, I asked a question.
Yeah, you already asked.
Really quick question. I know.
I don't know.
Do you feel in any sense that there's sometimes that Judaism itself and halacha itself moves back negatively impacts the community's mental health, for instance, on like the get issue. So when women can't get a get, whether or not rabbis can come together and create a new halacha that could positively impact the entire group of individuals in the community.
If we start talking about getting, we're never going to get out of here. Just saying. That was a tough example you gave, but okay, I understand what you're trying to say. We're gonna work it out. Yeah.
You spoke earlier about all the different postings that you spoke to in regards to the book, but
Sure.
I was wondering if you spoke to multiple types of mental health professionals and if different types of like therapeutic practices were brought into effect for different data.
Yep. Great question. Okay.
Oh, another specific example that was kind of touched on already. I'm a gynecologist, and I see a lot of from women who get very posty about NIDA, checking this, that, doing concept because I like that's the thing that manifests for them.
Sure.
So I guess kind of how do we deal with that, and also thinking about the way that we teach NIDA and tell women like don't look at the toilet paper, don't look this, like kind of hide, don't understand the way that your body works, so that you can kind of like keep the NIDA. Like how do we deal with that?
Okay. Zell? We're good? Okay. Now I'm going to answer all these questions. All right. Let's do this as quickly as I can, and then I'll let you go. Okay. The first question was, what do I do when there's a case with no answer? There is no such thing as a case with no answer. Why? Why? Not because, magically the halacha always fits. Yeah? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, let's take the example of someone, let's say, who is gay. All right? Let's take that example, right? A person will say, I want to have sex with another man, right? Pasuk says no. What do you say to that? Yeah? It's causing me distress. It's causing me distress. So I say to the person, look, I'm not going to tell you that you can do that because you can't. Yeah, the halacha says, the pasuk says you can't do that. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. Yeah, and we're going to work this out together. My goal is to forge a life for you within the Orthodox community that is somehow workable. It doesn't mean I can say yes to everything, but I'm not going to tell you just no and deal with it. That's not how it's going to be, right? So if I can help you, I will try. Yeah? But it's true, not every need or desire that a person has, right, I'm going to be able to say yes to. That's not the same as saying I have no answer. I have no way to allow the thing that you want me to allow. That's true. Yeah, there are some things that a person says, I want you to allow this. I will say, I cannot allow that. That is correct. But we will work to make sure that you have a life that is livable, and I'm not going anywhere. You can call me day or night, and I'm here for you, right? In any way that I can be. So that's what I mean when I say there is no such thing that there is no answer, right? I am dedicated to making people's lives better within the confines of whatever this orthodoxy allows, right? If the person doesn't want to be Orthodox, that's their prerogative. If they want to be Orthodox, that's fine too, and we can work within that, right? But that's their decision. They make that decision, right? To say that the halacha keeps you, like is somehow keeping you prisoner, that's kind of like a personal decision. You decide to live by the precepts of halacha, I respect that, and it causes you some strife. We need to try and figure that out, and I will be there once again to help as much as I can, right? Same thing with mental health, same thing with all these things, right? It's not that I have an answer that makes everybody happy all the time, but my answer is we're going to work the problem until we reach a solution that is doable. Let's see what we can work out. That's what I say to that, okay, as a general rule. The next question was, is there something that there was no diagnosis, no pikuach nefesh, and I wrote something, I scribbled something else here. All right. What did I scribble there? I'm not really sure. Doesn't matter. I got the idea. Anyway, let me explain something. Okay, let me explain about that. All right? This is really important. Actually, and I'm happy that you asked the question because it's actually there's a significant principle here, okay? That honestly, if you guys even come out just with this, it's really important, okay? And it's something which I explain to rabbis all the time about mental health. Mental health is not like jumping off a cliff. Meaning it's not like, well, if you don't do this, the person's going to die. It's not like that. It's more like sinking in mud. In other words, I think a lot of people here know, right, that someone with anorexia is not going to fast Yom Kippur. Right? You're familiar with that psak? Right? it's gotten around. Yeah, people are familiar with that. Okay, why? Why? It's pikuach nefesh. Really? So if they fast, what? They'll die on Yom Kippur? No. Oh, the next day they'll die? Also no. In a week? No. A month? No. 3 months? Also no. When are they going to die? What's the pikuach nefesh of the anorexia that you're talking about? I'll explain. Yeah? They have an eating plan. And if they get off the eating plan, then they might go back to unhealthy eating habits. And then as a result of that, they'll either become underweight and go there, or they'll return to bad thoughts, destructive thoughts, and suicidality. Wow, that's quite the process you took me on over there. In other words, it's a slow sinking into the mud. That's what it is, right? With mental health, it's not like you're going to look at the person and say, that person, pikuach nefesh. Most times, no. Most times, no. Most times, what's going to be is like you're walking by the person and they're up to their ankles in mud. And you'll be like, he's okay. He can get out of that. It's not a problem. Then you walk over there in a few hours. Now he's up to his knees in mud. Yeah, he can still make it out. Waist up to here. Now it's already hard to pull him out. Now the person's up to here. Now it's already complicated. We need to think about that and understand that and pull them out when they're down there, not when they got to here. If we wait till this, then it might not even work anymore. That's the problem. Mental health, you need to also look at the trajectory. You need to look also at what's going to happen. You need to understand the process. And you need to save the person early. You can't save them later on. That's why, a lot of times, right, people say to me, I remember at the beginning, people said to me, why are you paskening on anorexia and Yom Kippur? Just ask the doctor. I said, the doctor asks me. He doesn't know. Why? Because the doctor doesn't know if the person is in pikuach nefesh or not. He just doesn't know, right? You ask him, have you ever tried asking a mental health professional? Yeah? Well, he has a history of, I didn't ask what the history, can you give me a yes or, is it pikuach nefesh or not? I'll explain, yeah? A year ago, he had a suicidal attempt, and since then he's been kind of better, but there's still a bit, okay, that's the answer you're going to get. You're not going to get an answer that's like, absolutely, pikuach nefesh, don't let that person, like sometimes you'll get that, but a lot of times you won't. A lot of times you won't. And I'll tell you more than that, okay, with Yom Kippur specifically, okay? People say to me, sometimes I call up doctors, and I say to them, this person, should they fast Yom Kippur? Doctor says to me, no, they should fast. It's not pikuach nefesh. I said, one second. I'll decide if they fast, okay? You tell me what the situation is. Why? Why do I say that? Because they're wrong. The Shulchan Aruch does not, if you ever looked in Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim, Taf Reish Yud Chet, here I dropped a source, okay? In Orach Chaim, Taf Reish Yud Chet, the Shulchan Aruch talks about the halachas of fasting on Yom Kippur. And what's the language that he uses? What's the language? He doesn't say the person will die. What does he say? Efshar sheyichbad alav cholyo v'istaken. That's the language. Efshar sheyichbad alav cholyo. His sickness might get worse, v'istaken, and he'll get into a situation of danger. Efshar. Could be that his sickness will get worse as a result of the fast, v'istaken. So this person is already somewhat far removed from the pikuach nefesh situation. And the Rosh also says in Masechet Yoma, he says, Lo omrim shema yamut. We're not looking for he might die. We're just looking for he might deteriorate. Efshar sheyichbad alav cholyo v'istaken. So I tell the doctor, don't tell me whether he'll die. I don't care about that. I care, but not about that. I care about whether he'll deteriorate to a situation where he might put himself into danger. And even then, efshar, that there's a suffix. Is there a possibility? Efshar sheyichbad alav cholyo v'istaken. That's what I'm looking for. That's a far cry from pikuach nefesh in the sense he will die if he fasts. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking to know the trajectory, the process, and I'm okay with the suffix too. I always say that's something that I have that the therapists don't have. Yeah, the therapist's always looking for, what do we know, what do we don't know? I don't need to know. So I have rules for suffix. Suffix deoraita, suffix derabanan, suffix cholesh yeshbo, suffix cholesh erbo. I use my sfekas. I don't need to know. And how do you know for sure that he would have? I don't know for sure. I don't need to know for sure. I'm good with not knowing. I'm good with having a significant doubt that something could have happened. But maybe it wouldn't have happened. I don't care. If it could have happened, possibly, theoretically, that's enough for me. Therefore, the answer to your question is yes. There could be situations which are not pikuach nefesh directly, are not exactly diagnosable, etc. And I will still say to do a deoraisa, because I know the trajectory, because I know what's down the line, because I know that if I don't do this now, it will get to a situation where it's like that. So there could be cases like that, absolutely. Does that answer your question? Okay, great. Moving on. Someone asked me, I don't remember who it was, regarding the clinical versus the halachic. Look, we try very hard that won't happen, okay? We try very hard that the clinical advice will not contradict the halachic advice. With all that said, there could be cases where that is, okay? I actually came across that mostly with regards not to the patients, but to the professionals. Yeah. If someone says to me, okay, not as a person, okay, if someone said to you as a person, okay, I know there are a lot of professionals here, let's say not as a professional, okay? If someone came to you and said to you, hey, good news, yeah, you know your friend, I just got engaged to her. You'd be like, Mazal Tov. You'd be like, yeah, but don't tell her that I have that schizophrenia thing, right? Then I think you'd probably tell the friend, I think you'd probably say, like, before she gets married to that guy, she should probably know, okay? And that's actually also a mitzvah. Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. You're supposed to tell a person and save them from a potentially disastrous situation, right? If someone is withholding vital information, they should know before they marry that person. Ask the same question of a mental professional. No way. Yeah? Confidentiality. Yeah? Confidentiality is it's like Torah Misinai. Yeah? If you've ever asked a professional to break confidentiality, it's like the most horrible thing that a person can do. It's like murdering someone. It's like terrible. Yeah? So, and I respect that, But it was amazing. When I asked poskim about confidentiality, some said like this, some said like that, da-da-da-da-da. When I asked professionals, it was like a brick wall. It was like, no way. Yeah? Like they're not going to tell, and if it happens, okay, well, some said like this, some like that. So there could be sometimes distinctions between the clinical and the halachic, right? Okay, I try to, as much as I can, to smooth those out, but it's not like 100%, it's not perfect, and okay, what do we do in that situation? Like I said, we deal with it, I don't know. Yeah, I think that rabbis need to realize, like where clinicians are at, as an example that I gave, right? And to be able to also figure out why they're so adamant about that and maybe, revise how they think about it. And of course, other rabbis are actually respectful of the confidentiality rule and uphold it. Yeah, so there are different opinions about that, but that's a kind of thing. Bottom line is, we need to always reevaluate until we reach a situation where hopefully we can live, together, the clinicians and the halachists. Okay, all right, moving on. I want to finish up. Cases where halacha impacts community badly. That was a loaded question. It was really, really difficult. Yeah, look. In general, I believe I'm telling you what my philosophy is. Okay. Philosophically, I believe that there's no such thing. Meaning, what I mean by that? Philosophically, I believe that halacha is never bad for a person, but it could be utilized badly. Meaning, there's nothing inherently wrong with the idea that a husband should give the wife a get, but of course, it gives the husband the ability to blackmail the wife, and that's a terrible thing. Evil people will use any system. I don't think that a Kadosh Baruch Hu could have given a system of law that could not have had loopholes, or that human beings could not have somehow twisted, into whatever they wanted to use it in order to do harm to other people, like any system of law, secular or religious. Any system, be it the purest, be it from God Himself, when put into this world with all its machinations, is just going to be, it's going to be twisted and turned in all kinds of ways. That's just how things are. And anytime anyone strikes a law, like I said, you can look in secular law, there's always going to be a loophole. There's always going to be someone who takes advantage. There's always going to be some smart lawyer or smart accountant who figures out how to get away from certain things. And that's true also for religious law. At the end of the day, an evil person can always use the halacha in an evil way. That's for sure. And the Rambam says that in Moreh Nevuchim, Chelek Gimel Perek Lamed Daled, he talks about that. He says halacha is good for the majority, but there's a minority that is damaged by halacha. Once again, why? Because of human beings. Human beings utilize the halacha in ways that are hurtful sometimes. So in that situation, who has to defend both the halacha and the people? Us, right? The rabbis who care about the halacha and care about the bad name that the halacha is getting and care about the people who are being damaged and hurt, they have to defend, the halacha and to step up. Do we always step up? Do I have to tell you the answer to that? Yeah, obviously not. We don't always step up, to do what needs to be done. The aguna issue is a good example of that on some level, where not everyone always steps up and does what needs to be done. There's a lot of politics around that. People are always worried they're going to be on some black list and this and this and that, etc. I get it, but because I'm a rabbi and I understand. Yeah, and people have also tried to sometimes, sideline me. Yeah, okay, fine. It's how things are, in that world, and you have to deal with the amount of politics that there are. But bottom line is, I don't think that halacha is supposed to impact communities badly. My Rebbe, Rav Rabinovich Zatzal, wrote about that, and he said, halacha is supposed to make life better. It is, for the individual and for the community. If it's not, then something's wrong. Okay, either by the way that we're looking at it, or by the way that we are implementing it. Something's wrong. But it's not supposed to make life terrible. All right. And by the way, that's why we keep it. I'm positive. Meaning people say, no, you keep it because it's the truth. Okay. Yes, it's the truth. But if the truth, right, told you to hurt other people, you wouldn't do it because you're not a bad person. Right? So therefore, you wouldn't go out and say, well, halacha says I should smack people in the face twice a day. Yeah, so I'm going to do it. No, you wouldn't. Even if it was written in the Torah, you wouldn't do it. The Torah also says, ayin tachat ayin, it says eye for an eye. We don't do that, right? And Chazal already said, well, it's money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, what did the Torah really mean? It's a good question. Yeah, but did it really mean money? It's doubtful that that's what it meant in the original intent, that it really meant money. But okay, fine. Eventually, that's what it was translated into, and we went with that. Torah also says, "V'katzotayet kapa," you cut off a person's hand, right? In the pasuk, whatever. There's a lot of things the Torah says, and Chazal translate them in certain ways, and we look at it that way, and fine. Bottom line is, halacha should not be impacting community badly. We, the rabbis, have a responsibility, and if we're not discharging it, then shocking. The halacha has a bad rap. You know what I'm saying? Like, we couldn't have seen that coming. Yeah? But we need to do what we need to do. Anyway, okay. Someone asked me about, 2 more questions, we're done. Someone asked me about mental health modalities, different mental health modalities. I don't know how many people are familiar with different mental health modalities. The answer is, I dealt with the halacha, meaning, let's be honest, Nafshi BiShe'elati is about psychiatry more than it is about psychology, okay? It's more about the diagnoses, the definitions, et cetera, and less about the modalities, whether you believe in Freudian, theory or attachment theory or this or that or the other, et cetera. You like IFS better, you like EMDR, you like this, we can talk about different modalities, fine. Is there what to discuss in terms of the interaction between those modalities and Jewish living? Tons. And I'm also trying to work on something with that right now, but I'm one thing at a time. Give me some time. Yeah, I can't do everything. Yeah, so if someone here wants to work, wants to tell me things that they've had thoughts on that, great. But it's gonna take time to work everything out. Okay, but yes, dealing with psychological modalities is important. And it can be very, very significant in all kinds of ways. And I gave an example from CBT and ERP, but it's true for other things as well. We'll keep it at that. Last question that was asked was OCD and NIDA. It was a kind of a general question, if I remember correctly, right? About what we say and how we deal with it. I kind of hinted already before. I said that we should try to give very direct responses to people. Keep it very, very clear. Etc. I think that madrichot kalot, if they're teaching a kala, and they realize that the person has OCD, then yeah, they should be careful what they say, what they don't say. They should have a plan for that. I think that in Israel, in Nishmat, maybe the Eden Center also, they have certain programs for that they've developed to teach Kala teachers about what to say, what not to say, and how to do it. They also asked me for some advice about that. I think we just need to have clarity, on what needs to be said. But I don't think it's hard. Once you know what to say and how to do it, then I think it should be pretty straightforward. Thank you very much. And thank you.